Lerone Murphy and Torres Finney have both been catching some heat for being boring fighters after this weekend's UFC Fight Night card. Torres Finney kind of went out in his UFC debut, super grappling heavy game plan, didn't land much ground and pound, was not attacking submissions, just not a fun fight overall. And then for Lerone Murphy in the main event, fought kind of passively. People thought he was running away from Josh Emmett, and it just didn't lead to a super climactic main event. But in today's video, I want to run through who I think are the most boring ranked fighters in every weight class. Keep in mind, these are all going to be fighters within the top 15. And then I also will be ranking fights versus ranked competition more heavily. It's easy to be super entertaining when you can beat up on people that don't have a similar skill set to you, who are way less talented. But when you're actually fighting, higher level competition, I think that's where you can really see how exciting certain fighters are, because the most exciting fighters are able to put on bangers even when they're going up against great opponents. So keep that in mind. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. If you agree, disagree, let me hear it. If you enjoy, hit that like button and subscribe. But we are going to start off with the heavyweight weight class. And I feel like we could have gone with a few different directions here. I think you could go with some of the heavyweight grapplers who maybe don't have a super fan-friendly style. But when I was looking at like the Marcin Tyburas, the Sergey Spivaks, these are still guys who are finishing fights in their wins and their losses. So I ended up settling with Mick Parkin. He has had 5 UFC fights so far, and at heavyweight, 4 of those 5 have gone to decision. He's primarily a striker, but like at heavyweight, if you're primarily a striker and you don't have a ton of power, it's just not a super entertaining watch. He has 1 UFC knockdown in his 5 fights, and so just not having that finishing upside is not ideal. He is also someone who will kind of mix in the grappling, and he's primarily fought like dudes outside the top 15. His only ranked fight was his most recent one against Marcin Tybura, so he's fighting like bottom of the barrel heavyweights and still not having success on the feet. And if you're having to watch a heavyweight striking fight with like no knockdowns, it's just a pretty awful experience. So Mick Parkin going to be my most boring heavyweight. Now at light heavyweight, I kind of had a tough time with this one. I don't think there's someone who stands out as being like extremely boring. I ended up settling with Alexander Rakic. I still don't think he's like a super boring fighter. His second to last fight was an absolute banger against Yuri Prochazka. Although I will say, like, that's kind of what Yuri does. Like, you can't fight Yuri in a boring fashion, so not giving Rakic too much credit there. But in his last 6 fights, dating back to 2019, the majority of them have been pretty underwhelming. He had a decision loss to Volkan Ozdemir. He had a decision win against Anthony Smith, a decision win against Thiago Santos. He had the fight where he lost with injury against Jan Blachowicz. The Yuri fight was fantastic. And then his most recent fight against Magomed Ankalaev was also pretty boring and a decision loss. It doesn't help that in his most recent fight, he was pretty clearly down the first 2 rounds, and he had no urgency in round 3. Now, some of that was because his corner was telling him that like he was winning or it was at least 1-1, which was just not true. But in a weight class where finishes are pretty common, you have a lot of kind of glass cannons, your Johnny Walkers, where they're either going to go out, have a big finish, or they're going to get finished. They're going to be in entertaining fights. I ended up going with Alexander Rakic here. Still a very good fighter, just not super entertaining, at least compared to the rest of the top 15. Then down at middleweight, this might be controversial. I have Sean Strickland as the most boring fighter. There are a lot of Sean Strickland fans out there, and maybe it's not his fighting style, maybe it's just his personality, but I really cannot fathom how people actually sit down and enjoy watching Sean Strickland fight. He's someone who's going to go out, he's going to talk a big game about going to war and fighting to the death, and the man just does not back it up with his fighting style. And he fights in a way that is so safe. And, it's not necessarily a bad thing for him as like an MMA fighter, right? Like, you want to be safe. You don't want to be getting hit. But from an entertainment perspective, he fights in a way that's so safe where it's unlikely that either party gets finished. So he's super safe in his style where he's not going to overextend. He's not going to put himself in danger. So it's unlikely that he gets knocked out. And then he also fights in a way that's so passive and he's not really throwing any big shots, where it's very unlikely that he's actually going to hurt and finish his opponent. Since 2021, he has 11 UFC fights. 9 of those 11 have gone to decision. The only fight that he finished was against Abus Magomedov, who somehow was getting a shot into the rankings after 1 UFC win. And it was like a fight where Abus was out of gas by the 2nd round. And so it was like, yeah, he finished him, but quality of competition was just not there in that fight. And then he's been finished by Alex Pereira. But other than that, we're just seeing a lot of 5-round decisions. In my opinion, not super entertaining fights. He has only landed 2 knockdowns in those 11 fights, and 9 are going to decision, and he's only landing 2 knockdowns in those matchups, and a lot of 5-rounders also. I think he's also managed to turn fighters who have been like pretty consistently entertaining into some boring matchups. The second DDP fight was a real stinker, in large part because Sean Strickland just never went for it. He was consistently losing rounds and just never turned it up, never really, put the pedal to the metal to try to get a finish, try to come back. He was just, resigned to losing a decision. Also, Paulo Costa, someone who's consistently in super fun fights, he fights Sean Strickland, and it's just like a super boring 5-rounder. So even though he's had some success, he's been the champion. In my opinion, Sean Strickland is the least entertaining middleweight. Now, moving down to welterweight, we have another very highly ranked guy. He is actually the champion. It is going to be Belal Muhammad. And keep in mind, this is not me saying these guys are bad fighters. Belal Muhammad is a very, very good fighter. He's extremely well-rounded, but that also doesn't mean that he is not a very, very boring fighter. And I do think he's boring. Since 2020, he has fought 9 times in the UFC. One of those have ended in a finish, and that was a standing TKO against Sean Brady. Now, looking back on it, a great win. That fight actually was pretty fun, but if that's like the one banner fight, a standing TKO in your last 9, not ideal. He has 0 career knockdowns in the UFC. That is a crazy number considering how long he's been in the promotion. And he has fought some fun fighters and kind of just turned those matchups into stinkers. Wonder Boy, Vicente Luque, Gilbert Burns. I think all guys who are known for being very entertaining. You can't really talk me into getting excited about watching any of those fights again. Just not super fan friendly. I think it's a tough combination of he doesn't have any power on the feet, so there's very limited knockout upside, and then his style of grappling is very control heavy, where I will say he has some decent ground and pound. It's nothing crazy, but there's just no submission offense, so no power on the feet along with just control grappling on the ground leads to a pretty boring style. Now moving down to lightweight, I actually don't think there's a great answer here. I went with Mateusz Gamrot, but I really wouldn't say I think Gamrot is a super boring fighter. I think this is the most exciting weight class in the UFC. I mean, pretty much every guy in the top 15 is willing to just go out there, stand and bang, have super entertaining performances, get into wars. And it seems crazy having Gamrot here, considering his last fight was a fight of the night against Dan Hooker. An awesome fight from both those dudes. I think the reason why I'm going with Gamrot here is I feel like some of his fights have been very good in spite of him, where it's like the other guy's style can kind of turn Gamrot into these exciting performances because he wants to go out there, he wants to have this relentless grappling pace, but he kind of struggles to firmly stamp rounds where he'll get clipped on the feet by a super exciting fighter, and then he'll kind of win the round back by control grappling, just holding them down, not really attacking submissions, not really landing a ton of ground and pound. So he has had other fun fights. The fight of the night against Arman, I think was super entertaining, but it's once again Arman kind of, stuffing those takedowns and kind of having the fight play out on the feet. I did consider Grant Dawson for this spot. He's somewhere towards the bottom of the top 15. He is very grappling heavy, wants to get the back, kind of hold on to you, but I think he does a great job landing ground and pound, attacking submissions, and I just think with his grappling style, he's a lot more dominant, which in my opinion is more fun to watch. So kind of a tough call. Feel bad picking someone here, but if I did have to pick someone, it would be Gamrot. Now looking at featherweight here, I think this is where we get into the distinction of having fun fights versus unranked competition versus the top 15. So Youssef Zalal, in his second UFC run, started off 3-0 with 3 finishes. So his last 4 fights in the UFC, he's finished 3 out of 4 of them. It seems weird having him ranked here as the most boring featherweight, but the last fight against Calvin Kattar was very, very rough. And Youssef Zalal was doing in this fight what people acted like Lerone Murphy was doing against Josh Emmett. He did not even try to hide that he was coasting to a decision in round 3. There was no attempt to, I don't even think win the round, but no attempt to actually get Calvin Kattar out of there. And you think about his opponent, right? That was his first fight in the rankings. Calvin Kattar is someone who's pretty much on the way out of the top 15, and Youssef Zalal fought a very unfan-friendly style of fight against Kattar. I can't imagine what it's going to look like against some of the better guys in the weight class, some of the more dangerous guys, the more powerful fighters within the top 10. So I will go with Youssef Zalal here. I think a lot of people are going to be thinking of Movsar Evloev for this, But I think Movsar kind of gets overhated in terms of like how, unfun his fights are. He does have 0 knockdowns in the UFC, and he also has 0 finishes. And I think it was reasonable to kind of, hate on him a little bit before he was fighting top competition. Because it's like you're easily beating guys by decision, but when you're fighting outside the rankings, you're not finishing dudes, you're not really putting a beating on them. That is kind of rough. But I think we look at his last 4 fights against legit competition, like these are not bad fights. The fight against Aljamain Sterling was awesome. I thought the fight against Arnold Allen was solid. The Diego Lopez fight was awesome. The fight against Dan Ige, I think, was a solid performance. So he's had 4 straight fights against legit competition. I don't think any of them can be classified as boring fights. And then Lerone Murphy, some people might think him after the Josh Emmett fight. I just don't think his fights have been that bad. I didn't think the Lerone Murphy-Josh Emmett fight was like the best thing in the world, but I also didn't think it was like an awful fight. His fights against Dan Ige, Barbosa, like I think were fine. I wouldn't say I'm overly excited to see Lerone Murphy fight, but I also don't think he's a super boring guy. And then also like the people who are upset with how he fought Josh Emmett, if Lerone Murphy is not going to go out there and just go super wrestling heavy and control grapple Josh Emmett, if you don't want him to do what he did, you're pretty much just wanting him to go out there and get nuked by Josh Emmett, right? Like, you can't just go in and fight like a marauder against Josh Emmett because you're probably going to get put out. And if you're going to say, oh, Ilia Topuria did that, that's because Ilia Topuria is one of one, like potentially the greatest featherweight ever, just in terms of his peak. Like, Ilia Topuria is not equivalent to Lerone Murphy. So if you didn't want Lerone Murphy to stay on the outside, kind of pick him apart, you just wanted to see a Josh Emmett huge knockout, which is fine, but I'm not going to ding Lerone Murphy for, in one matchup fighting something that was going to help him get a win against a very, very dangerous opponent. Now, the next weight class we have here is Bantamweight, and I actually think this is a pretty similar situation to Yusuf Zalal. I did consider the champion, Merab Dvalishvili. Also think you can make an argument for Umar Nurmagomedov being here, but I ended up going with Mario Bautista, and it really just goes back to the Jose Aldo fight and just how egregious that performance was. Like, Mario Bautista had some pretty fun, entertaining matchups before he got into the top 15, but when he got his first ranked opponent, he picked up the win by really just holding Jose Aldo up against the cage. Now, I've been on record saying that I don't think he should have got the decision, not even in like a, oh, it was a boring fight, he didn't deserve it type of way. But like, if we're actually scoring for damage, holding Aldo against the cage should not be scoring for Mario Bautista. I think Aldo outlanded him in at least 2 of the rounds. And so like, I don't think he should have won the fight at all. But he gets the decision in just a super kind of bummer of a fight. You get this opportunity to fight this legend in Jose Aldo, and you like slip through with a win in just, pinning him against the cage, not doing any damage, not great. We'll see if he can redeem himself against Marlon Chito Vera. I believe that is his upcoming fight. I think some people would go with Merab. I think what's interesting about Merab is that when you just look at his fighting style, I definitely wouldn't say it's super entertaining, but I feel like he like mixes in his personality into his fights that make it a little bit more exciting, right? Like, he's going to be emoting on you after he takes you down. He's like mocking Henry Cejudo. He's like kissing Sean O'Malley in the cage. He's mocking Umar Nurmagomedov. And I do think that just gives him a little bit of a step up, and it like makes his not super entertaining fight style a little bit more entertaining when you actually see it. And then for Umar, like, I do think there's a case. I just, the Mario Bautista Jose Aldo fight was just, left a bad taste in my mouth. So he's going to be the pick for Bantamweight. And then at Flyweight, I think a very entertaining weight class. I'm going to go with Asu Elmabayev. He has 5 UFC fights. His UFC debut was a submission win. His next 3 wins were all decision Ws, where he's very grappling heavy, but not landing a ton of damage. And then his most recent fight got a main event against Manel Kape and was just outclassed. In his 5 UFC fights, he is averaging 2.32 significant strikes per minute. That is very, very low. So Asu Elmabayev is going to be my pick here. But that's going to wrap it up for my most boring fighter in every weight class. Drop your picks down below. Would love to hear them. Let me know what you thought of my calls. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.